Margaret Atwood,
Hello.
nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I read the Testaments.
Did you?
I loved it.
Well, that's good to know.
I'll talk to you about it later on, but I read it on the plane back from, I had a horrible routing from St. John's to Halifax, Halifax to Montreal, and Montreal to Toronto.
Was that on purpose or was it weather?
It was, I didn't pay attention to my own flights that I was booking. It's called I pressed book and didn't pay too much attention to it, but it gave me the occasion to have 9 hours in a row.
That is quite a long time.
And I read the whole goddamn thing, top to
Well,
bottom.
I'm very pleased that you weren't watching family cartoons.
No, I
Boy, I probably would have been doing.
I tried to stay away from Garfield and stuck to the Testament. I'll talk to you about it in a second. We're talking in early November, but we're recording this interview in celebration of your 80th birthday on November 18th. So I guess I can be the first to say happy 80th birthday.
Thank you very much.
Pretty good, hey?
Not too shabby.
And on around your 80th birthday, you meet the Queen at Windsor Castle not that long ago, made you a member of the Order of the Companions of Honor for your services to literature. And I was thinking you were in your teens when Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the throne, right?
Early teens.
Early teens.
Yes.
So what was going through your head when you were standing in front of her?
Well, of course, we go back further than that because I remember her during the war when she was she was a model to young people. She and her family and Princess Margaret did not go to another country. They stuck it out, and I think she was a truck driver at that point.
She was driving trucks for the...
Yeah, as a teenaged person.
Right.
So she was held up as a model
Right.
of behavior to young people.
So did you have some sort of... Did you feel the presence of royalty in front of her, given that she is, in fact...
She is 93 years of history.
Yeah.
Right there in front of you, and only a baker's dozen years older than me.
But then, I mean, and there she is, right in front of you.
I know, and she is astonishing. I mean, to carry on that schedule that she does,
Right.
It's a high bar.
I'm always expecting her to stop, I'm always expecting her to retire or to get off the road a little bit,
She will keep going as long as she can.
I think so.
And this was a lot of people at this ceremony, and she just... she did it all.
How do you find those kind of ceremonies, that kind of thing?
Well, that kind of thing, I'm not sure that there are too many of
No,
that kind of thing. There aren't too many in Windsor Castle. There aren't too many
Well, how did you find
with the
it?
Queen. Oh, I thought it was extremely well run.
Yeah?
Not their first rodeo. They know how to do these things very efficiently. And on top of that, you got to see all the amazing paintings they've got inside Windsor Castle.
It's really beautiful, hey?
Well, it's very historic.
Of course.
You think somebody cornered the white satin market and made a fortune because there are all of these pictures of generals and grandees and, people in their outfits with the white satin breeches and then the enormous capes lined with white satin, and you think, wow. So I said that, and somebody said, there was a person who cornered the market in black velvet right at the end of the 19th century because they knew Queen Victoria was going to die, and you had to wear mourning for a year.
So in anticipation of her dying, they bought
They
up all
bought it all up.
They
and
bought,
then
that's good old English preparedness, isn't
I
it?
think that's good old futures trading.
Yeah. So this gives me an opportunity to talk to you, not about a new book or anything like that, but an opportunity to talk about kind of everything you've done and stuff. And I've been really interested in sort of your background, especially the stuff around living in the woods and the stuff around your ancestors. And I wanted to start by going back to the 1600s.
The 1600s.
Yeah, I know.
That would be the arrival of the Puritans in New England.
Well, yeah, you weren't around then.
Not personally.
No, but in spirit.
I don't think I was in spirit either.
But you co-dedicated The Handmaid's Tale to a woman named Mary Reeve Webster. You also wrote about her in the 1995 poem Half-Hanged Mary.
Yeah.
You described her as your favorite ancestor.
If she was. So the big question is, did she have any children? Because if she didn't have any children, she couldn't be an ancestor. But she was certainly part of those Websters. And part of the extended Webster family, as it were, and my grandmother was one of those Websters.
And I heard your grandmother used to say on a Sunday she was related to you, and on a Wednesday she'd say she wasn't related to you.
She used to change her mind a bit about it, depending on how daring she felt.
So who was she?
She was a woman who, luckily for her, was accused of witchcraft before the Salem thing really got going. So she was taken into Boston. She was put on trial. She was acquitted. And she went back to Hadley, Massachusetts, but the locals didn't accept the verdict, so they strung her up anyway. It was before they had invented the drop, which breaks your neck, so they just kind of hauled her up, like a flag on the end of the rope.
Oh, so as opposed to being hanged by standing and then you drop and fall and it breaks your neck.
So the drop was later, it breaks your neck.
Right.
So they just kind of strung her up and left her up there all night. Came in the morning to cut down the corpse, and she was still alive. So if they thought she had supernatural powers before this event, they must really have thought it afterwards. And that's what we know about her. We know that Cotton Mather, who was one of the great whippers-on of the whole witchcraft thing, was also a great whipper-on of sentiment against her. And what was she accused of doing? She was accused of making an old man extremely valetudinarious.
Valetudinarious?
Old.
She had made an old man old?
Older.
She had somehow...
Older than he ought to have been.
Right, it was somehow her fault.
Apparently.
Through witchcraft.
Well, he, quite frankly, it sounds as if he was having some hallucinations.
Right.
And since one of them was of her, it was kind of fatal. It was very bad to have someone have a hallucination about you.
So she survives the hanging.
She does.
And then is seen...
She lives another 14 years.
And must have terrified the townsfolk even more.
Or she was terrified. I'm sure they were mutually terrified.
I'm sure they were.
Of one another.
I feel like that story stuck with you, though. I mean, it must have if it made it to you.
Well, my aunts were great collectors of such kinds of stories. And, of course, they were from Nova Scotia, and people in Nova Scotia like to collect stories like that and send you your genealogical background. So I have a lot of that kind of thing.
Well, your mom and your dad were both from Nova Scotia,
They
right?
were.
Did you feel a connection? I know they left, but did you? And you didn't grow up there, but
They
did you?
were Depression immigrants.
Did you feel a connection to Nova Scotia growing up?
Absolutely, because we had to go back after the war. You couldn't go during the war, but after the war, we would scream out there to visit them, make the rounds.
That's beautiful. What do you remember from going out there?
Oh, quite a lot. Because I have a lot of cousins, and I'm still in touch with them. But they, one of them was the Annapolis Valley, with a place on the Bay of Fundy as well. And the other one was down at the South Shore. So my dad's family was South Shore, around Shelburne. Do you know anything about that part of it?
I know the South Shore. I don't know Shelburne.
Okay. So there's a river there called the Clyde River. And if you go up the river, you get to a place called Upper Clyde, which is sort of a bump on the map. So that's where he was born in 1906.
And when you went there, did it feel like a whole different life to you? I mean, there was.
It was like the 19th century because they didn't have any electricity yet.
Right.
So you were walking into a 19th century rural farm ecosystem.
And this was what, the 1950s?
A little earlier than that even.
1940s.
So the war ends in 45 essentially.
Yeah.
So after that time, we would go out and visit quite regularly.
But I feel like the life without these comforts and electricity and television is very much a part of your story. It
allows me to write a novel like Alias Grace without a lot of research because I saw it in action.
And you lived it. I mean, when you were growing up out in the woods
That's
of
true.
Northern
That wasn't
Quebec.
A farm. Yeah, so
But it was
farm
without.
is different from out in the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was without electricity, etc.
But I mean, you spent a good part of every year with your family in the woods of Northern Quebec. Your dad was an entomologist. From the time you were a few months old, you'd head into the bush from the spring until the fall.
That's correct.
So if you close your eyes and think back to that childhood, What moments come to mind?
Your feet got very cold. Because you would outgrow your shoes.
Right.
And then you wouldn't have any. Yeah, so
you'd have to go around in the cold dirt with your
a certain
bare
amount
feet
of
on.
going around in cold feet.
Do you look back on it? It's obviously a pretty unconventional way to grow up. I mean, a lot of
Well, it was more usual then.
Yeah.
First of all, more people didn't have electricity. It wasn't the norm. A lot of people didn't have cars. It was right after the war. Highways were actually, if you can believe it, quite empty. So it was a different period of time. And within that different period of time, there were more people living like that than there are now. So it may have been less unusual than you, from your perspective, might think.
What were some of your jobs you had to do when you were living out in the woods?
A lot of carrying in the wood.
Right.
Because, of course, any heating and cooking is going to come from wood. So kids were enlisted quite early to do chores. And that was nothing new because my parents had both done the same.
Did you mind being away from everybody? Like, did you mind being away?
Who was this everybody of which you speak?
Other children than your siblings, Margaret? Other children than your siblings, at least.
That's everybody.
Yeah, that's others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had some others from time to time.
Yeah.
Some other children of other scientists and things would pass through, and there was another one living not too far away that had 2 children. So it wasn't completely devoid of others. And then around 45 or so, we moved to Lake Superior. So north of Lake Superior, there were more children that could be acquired there. So maybe 3 or 4 more.
And this was still in the summertime when you would go out to the...
Spring, summer, and fall.
There were still some... And you'd miss the end and beginning of school, right?
Yippee.
Yeah. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, sitting in the desk, that was kind of... Kids did not evolve to sit in desks.
Right.
They didn't evolve to be inside rooms all the time. So what's coming back right now is the idea of outdoor schools. Making quite a lot of inroads, and they feel that children actually learn better when it's interactive learning with their environment rather than just on the page.
Do you feel like that shaped your life at all, that experience living out in the woods
Well, I
like
don't
that?
have a control group. So
I can get one
another
together.
me.
Right.
I don't have a mini.
Right.
I don't have a duplicate me that was brought up in some other way.
Right.
So, of course, you would say, sure, it did. So reading, writing, and drawing, a lot of that went on because there weren't any other... I didn't have an iPad, Tom. There weren't any... I see you sitting there with your iPad.
I've been told there were iPads back then, Margaret. I hate to fact check you here, but I was told.
No, they were called blackboards.
They were called Slate.
There were no iPads. Yeah, so it wasn't, and of course, since it was in the woods, there were no cinema, no movies, no radio. We couldn't get much on a radio up there.
Were there bears?
Oh, yes, Tom.
Scary.
Oh, yes.
Must have been a little scary. I'd be scared.
Well,
like
respectful. I think you need to be respectful of bears and not leave your food strewn around. And if you catch a fish, hang it up from a tree.
But it's hard to have that kind of...
As any sensible person would do.
Hard to have that kind of perspective when you're 8 years old and in the middle of the dark woods.
I'm not sure about that.
I suppose, but I'd be a little terrified. I remember when I used to be out in the woods when I was that age. I was a little scared of the moose or something like that.
Well, the moose can be tricky at mating season. It's true.
Yeah, but they didn't have to worry about that.
Well, you want to stay away from them.
So apparently,
What were you doing messing around with the mooses, Tom?
I was just trying to build a tree house is all I was trying to do, and they were trying to eat the moss off the trees is all I was trying to do. So you allegedly say there were no iPads. I still don't have any proof. We're going to get someone to check that while we're doing the interview.
There was no Starbucks.
No, I don't know about that because that seems like that's always been around.
There were no lattes.
Hold on. You're blowing my mind. So you ended up writing and illustrating your first novel when you were 7 called Annie the Ant. It still exists.
Yes, it's a bad example of a narrative arc.
I'm going to give you the first line. It was late in the afternoon and all the ants were busy. Some of them were pulling bugs. other crumbs of bread or cookies, all of these to give their larvae.
Yeah, snappy opening.
So tell me, what kind of 7-year-old writes that? What kind of 7-year-old were you to be writing that, Margaret?
I would say I was probably quite well informed about the habits of ants.
But someone who wanted to write about it, someone who wanted
Evidently,
to write a piece about it, yeah.
We had previously been writing comic books quite a bit and reading them, I must say, as well. Mm-hmm. So we did have illustrated Annie the Ant. We have a picture of Annie herself when she got legs. The problem with the plot is 3/4 of it she does nothing because she's an egg.
Right.
Then she's a larva.
Right.
Then she's a pupa.
Right.
And until that's over with, nothing happens, Tom.
Nothing to do. It's a bad narrative. That's a bad.
No action till
There's
right
no
at the
Starbucks,
end.
no iPad, and no narrative arc.
No murders. Nothing. No combat.
But I could, maybe because your father was an entomologist, and perhaps because you lived out in the woods like that. But you seem to have no fear of insects.
I have no fear of insects as such.
Why do you think people are afraid of insects?
Creepy, crawly, and lots of legs.
Think that might be it?
Yeah. So usually even more afraid of spiders.
I used to be afraid of carpenter ants.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Well, you don't want them in your house.
No.
That's for sure.
They used to show up here,
but you weren't afraid of them as such. You were afraid of what they were going to do to your wood.
I was more afraid of what they felt like when they were crawling on my hand, you know what I mean?
Why would they be crawling on your hand?
Because I pick them up.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting down to it. You obviously weren't that afraid of them.
Do you want me to be charging you by? I could charge you by the hour if you'd like. But I also read that you you chose to go to Sunday school as a child, which is not something about. You talk about how children aren't meant for the desk, and they sort of have to be forced in there. A lot of children don't choose to go to Sunday school.
I know, but it was the forbidden fruit because my parents didn't really approve of it.
So it was
of course I went.
It was a rebellious act to go to Sunday school?
No, it was an act of curiosity. I later on went to every single different religion I could get my hands on, including the spiritualists.
What Sunday school was it?
It was the Deer Park United.
And did it stick with you?
No, it wasn't Deer Park. No, Deer Park United is where I went to Brownies. Mm-hmm. It was Bloor Street United.
Right, in Toronto, I suppose.
Oh, yes.
So did any of that stick with you? Did you come home to your largely, I'm guessing, irreligious parents and say, hey, I went to Sunday school. I found out about the Lord. Let's do this.
No, but I won the prize for best Bible verse memorizer, plus the prize for best essay on temperance or why you shouldn't drink.
Can you remember any of the?
Absolutely.
Can you remember the verse?
Can't remember which verse. I think it was a multiple verse test, but it was Psalms. So a couple of different Psalms. They were quite nice.
Can you remember any of the temperance essay?
Absolutely. Here's why you shouldn't drink.
Okay.
When you drink and alcohol is in your bloodstream, your capillaries expand. And then if you go out into the snow and fall over, you will freeze to death faster.
I'm going to poke a hole in that.
You think?
Yeah.
Why?
Just drinking the hot weather.
You're missing the point, Tom.
What am I really?
Yes.
If the only problem with drinking is that when you go,
if you develop this habit in the hot weather, you will carry it over into the winter, and then you're doomed, Tom.
Who's to say? Who's to say? All I got from your essay on temperance is that I just got to drink during the month of July.
Well, I'll hold you to that.
You can just give me a shout in August and make sure I'm staying off the booze.
Stop now, Tom.
But that's interesting to me. It's interesting to me that you, again, most children aren't curious about faith. It's something that they have to go to. Most children aren't encouraged to be curious about religion. It's something that's kind of foisted upon them. It's interesting to me.
Yes.
I don't expect you to know why, but it's interesting.
I think their idea was that children shouldn't be brainwashed, but should make up their own minds later.
And did you retain any notion of Christianity from there?
I'm extremely well versed. Why is that? Because not only did I go to Sunday school, in which you didn't learn the interesting parts, I'm here to tell you. Mm-hmm. But I could bone up on those later, because in order to go through English language and literature, in the late 50s and early 60s, you had to know this stuff. You have to know something about Christianity and theology in order to make your way through people like Milton and indeed even Shakespeare to a certain extent.
Lewis and stuff like that.
And certainly John Bunyan. And any rather more pious 19th century novels. You even need it in order to decipher the titles of a lot of 20th century novels.
But it also leads, I'm guessing that some of the larger grand lessons of Christianity were stuff that would be probably taught around the house in sort of more of a humanist way, the do unto others
you
as
got
I
them
have,
in school,
you know.
because unlike the United States,
Right.
Canada did not have the separation of church and state.
Right.
So there were two school systems, the Protestant and the Catholic. And the Protestant is now pretty secular. But at that time it wasn't. So you got Bible readings every morning at school.
What'd you make of that?
Well, it was just something that happened at school. Another one of those things that happened at school.
I'll tell you something that else that happened in school. And if you're just tuning in, I'm speaking with the author Margaret Atwood. There's a story you told that I'm really curious about. Well, you were at high school at Leaside here in Toronto. You were walking across a football field and you had an experience. And here's what you wrote about it later. The day I became a poet, I was scuttling along in my usual furtive way, suspecting no ill, when a large invisible thumb descended from the sky and pressed down on the top of my head. A poem formed.
It's a metaphor, Tom. There wasn't really a thumb.
I was told there were no metaphors back then, Margaret. No iPads, no Starbucks.
Look again.
No
it was
metaphors.
All metaphor. That's all we had.
What happened? What happened? What do you remember?
Well, I
from
just
that?
started writing. So, what were my choices before that time? Keep it in mind that we had something called the guidance textbook, which was gray.
Yeah.
And in the guidance textbook, there were all the careers you might possibly have. And there were a lot of careers for male types of people. And there were 5 for female types of people. And they were nurse, secretary, public school teacher, airline stewardess, which is what they were called then, and home economist.
Yes, I saw home economist.
Yeah,
what is
were
a home
those?
economist?
Do you know Archie comics?
Yes, of course.
Do you know early Archie comics?
Yeah.
Do you know 50s Archie comics?
I was a deep Archie comics reader growing up.
Well, that's what Betty and Veronica were doing when they were making cookies for the boys.
Home ec.
Yes.
I didn't know it was a profession. I thought it was
Boys
something you learned
did
in school.
shop
Okay.
with the wood.
So and the girls do home ec. They
They
learn to
did home
sew.
ec.
They learn to
Yes,
Right.
all those things.
right. So
So why had I taken that? Because I should have taken secretarial sciences. Then I'd know how to type, which I don't. But it was too scary.
right.
It was scary. Girls went into it who wore their boyfriends' ankle bracelets, and
Is that a thing? Is that like when you're
it
going
was a
steady,
thing. Yes, it was a thing.
like wearing your class pin?
Oh no, it was a little more scary than that. How can I translate it? I don't think there is anything you can translate it to anymore.
I think it's perhaps DMing a selfie on Instagram these days. Perhaps that's it.
I don't know what it would be equivalent
No,
to,
maybe
but
not. Maybe not.
just recall that I was 12 when I went to high school, and I was not ready for a lot of this stuff.
But so I want to go back to that moment. Is that I understand that it was a metaphor and a thumb didn't place itself on your temple.
It did not.
But do you remember was there truly a moment you're walking across a football field and you said, "Oh my God, I think I'm going to be a
Pretty
poet"?
well.
Can
Yes,
you place it?
Yeah, I just did. I told you. I was wearing my pink princess line dress that I had sewed myself in home ec.
Mm-hmm.
And at that very moment, I thought, goodbye, pink dress. It's going to be black from now on.
And when you were writing poems, did you feel something different that you had never felt before? I know when I speak to musicians, they say, "Oh, the first time I picked up a guitar, I felt," or the first time.
It must have been so, Tom, but this is a long time ago now. I have drawers full of this stuff.
Right.
I thought it was really good. It's pretty bad, but that's how you learn, you know?
Yeah, I suppose so. What were you writing poems about?
Oh, all kinds of things. The Hungarian Revolution, stuff like that.
Oh, just typical teenage stuff.
Yeah, well, it was a big deal in 1956.
I'm sure it was, but it wasn't, compare thee to a summer's day or can I wear your ankle bracelet?
No, we were into the seamier side of things.
Right.
So definitely not lyrical love poems of the 17th century.
Were your buddies into poetry as well? Were you all
Not at
writing
all.
poems together?
Nope. No, this was just an eccentricity of mine. So one of the people I went to high school with told me much later that she thought it was very brave of me to just come out and say that I was going to be a writer, because I didn't confine myself to poetry.
Right.
I was going to be a writer in all fields. So I started with everything that I currently do, the nonfiction prose, the fiction, and the poetry.
Well, in your yearbook,
which I wrote.
You wrote your yearbook?
Yeah.
What do you mean you wrote your yearbook?
I wrote all the entries for my class in the yearbook. So what you're about to quote was written by me.
Why did you write all your...
Because I was elected to be the person who wrote all the write-ups of the people in my class.
Well, let me read the thing that I thought someone else wrote.
Me and my boyfriend Paul did it.
That seems more like an admission than a fact, Margaret. It feels like something you're finally getting out there.
I'm setting the scene for you.
I appreciate that. Okay, so ready. This was presumably written by somebody else, but
no, it wasn't. Written by me. Everybody knew that.
All right. So you wrote about yourself in the third person, I guess.
Of course.
Peggy's not-so-secret ambition is to write the Canadian novel, and with those English marks, who doubts that she will?
Yep.
Quite a thing to write about yourself, by the way.
Absolutely.
That's that's very nice of you to write that about yourself. It feels like something that someone else would write about you. I'm glad that you...
And it was accepted as being more or less what ought to have been written about me.
And it showed some confidence, I think, in your ability to do so, Margaret.
I know. What stupidity. If I had been less ignorant, I never would have thought that.
What's the difference between naivety and stupidity is the question, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll revise it. How naive. Yeah.
Were you really thinking about writing the great Canadian novel as a teenager?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. I knew nothing about publishing or any of those things at all because it hardly existed. So there had been writers in the 30s. And there had even been some bestsellers like L.M. Montgomery, and there had been a couple of bestsellers that we just didn't know about at all, like the Tin Flute. Gabrielle Roy sold an astonishing number of copies in the 40s, but of course this wasn't the 40s anymore. So yeah, I just thought I could do it. Why not?
I like how it's not necessarily about writing the best novel you could, but it seems to be imbued with some, again, third person ambition. Like, I want to write the great Canadian novel.
Well, people kept talking about the great American novel.
Of course.
And why shouldn't there be a great Canadian one, which they were not talking about?
Well, I want to get to how that all worked out in just a second. But Margaret Atwood, you studied at the University of Toronto with the great literary critic Northrop Frye. You've said that he stopped you from, quote, dying young and poor in a Paris garret.
Well, that was what I was going to do. I was going to run away to Paris, smoke gitane. Not possible. They made me cough. Drink absinthe, again, not something I was good at. And live in a garret, write my deathless masterpieces in the evenings, wait tables during the day, get TB, and cough to death by the age of 30, as one did.
What made you want to do that? Who were you?
Romanticism.
Who were you looking to? Who had done that path that you were?
Variations of it. It was sort of the John Keats crossed with Catherine Mansfield type of thing.
Right. And that is sort of the stereotypical dream of the author, isn't it?
When they're 16.
Right. To live in a I often get.
I should say when they're 20.
I would often get young authors coming to Newfoundland and saying, "I'm just going to move out to the lighthouse out there."
Right. That lasted how many weeks?
I think we're talking hours. So what did Northrop Frye do to you to dispel you of that?
He said,
path?
"How would you like to have a Woodrow Wilson scholarship and go to graduate school?" And I said, "No, I think I'm going to go to Paris and." Et cetera. And he said, I think you would get more writing done if you went to graduate school. And he was right, because I did have a job as what would now be called a server, but was then called a waitress.
Of course.
And it was very debilitating.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the difference between a friend of mine who's a stand-up comic. He often says to people, do you want to be a stand-up comic or do you want to have been a stand-up comic?
I think the latter.
Yeah. So I think those who go to drink absinthe in Paris perhaps want to have been writers.
Or maybe they want to have been absinthe drinkers.
Well, who doesn't?
Well, I don't anymore.
I think I might still harbor a little bit of that myself, to be honest. It's going to bring in a bottle for me and you. So you saw. I think he probably taught you then what an actual author is and what a
No,
writer
he
and
didn't.
what
No,
is.
nobody did that.
Okay.
There wasn't a model, and that was why I think we got into in the 60s, creating publishing companies and later on creating the Writers Union, because nobody had any idea of how to do this.
Right. Did you ever imagine what your life would have been like had you gone to Paris and smoked cigarettes and been a server?
Yeah, my French would have been one heck of a lot better than it is.
Yeah. But, I don't know if that, you must be grateful that it all turned out the way that it did, and that you didn't head over to some kind of cafe and hang out with a monkey.
What?
Eating a striped shirt, wearing a striped
What are you
shirt.
talking about?
I think my only idea of Paris, for some
Stop
reason,
that.
I've been there a
That's
bunch.
terrible.
I've been there a lot, but yet I
yeah?
still think about Bugs Bunny cartoons from
Oh,
1931.
is that what it
I'm
is?
not entirely
Bugs
sure.
Bunny cartoons. Okay.
That's it's my own fault.
What can you do?
See, back in the woods, you didn't have Bugs Bunny cartoons. You had to make your own.
We had Bugs Bunny comics, but only after the war.
You were a comic person too, weren't you? You liked
Absolutely.
comics. What did you like about them?
Well, that was what there was. So that was it. That it was comics. That was the form that was disapproved of by adults.
Oh,
So
yeah.
now it would probably be the internet, or it would be, porno films or something like that. But then it was comics.
Or Twitter.
They were supposed
or
to be
Facebook,
bad for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or TikTok. TikTok is the
What
thing.
is that?
TikTok is this video platform. Every video is 13 seconds long. I think it's entirely populated by people under 30. And I see nothing but kind of older people get very mad about it. But really, it's just...
What's on it?
You'll see like a video of someone who they'll wave a wand over themselves and they'll turn into somebody else. Or they'll...
What's wrong with that?
Nothing wrong with it in my opinion. But, I think the old folks tend to not like the
They
stuff
think
that
it's
the new
trivial.
folks are doing. Yeah, exactly. They were probably doing that in the 1700s. They probably thought, oh, your bonnet was tied the wrong way. Back in my day, we used to tie our bonnets on the top.
What people forget about the advent of the Gutenberg printing press is that we think out from it poured all of these classics.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, out from it poured a lot of pornographic literature and cheap fiction and political tracts. And religious tracts.
I can't believe I'm about to say this. I'm so happy you brought up the printing press.
And why are you happy?
Well, Margaret.
Because it brings you to Marshall McLuhan.
Well, no, it doesn't bring me to Marshall McLuhan.
It ought to.
No, the hallway out there brings me to Marshall McLuhan. Did you see the big picture of him out in the hallway?
Oh, I must go look at
Yeah,
it.
he's lifelike. Oh, sorry, life size.
Is it?
Yeah.
Not bigger?
No, I think about
No.
the size of him.
All right.
As far as I can tell, I've never met the man, but that's what I assume that's how big he was.
I'll go and tell you.
You let me. You fact check it when you go out there.
I will.
You met Marshall McLuhan, by the way?
Of course, dear. I'm really old.
Come on.
Yes, I
And Gutenberg?
Yes.
Met him too.
Steve Gutenberg is who I'm
Yes.
talking about.
No,
Marshall McLuhan, tell me, what was he like?
So Marshall McLuhan hung out at St. Mike's, which is just south of Victoria College.
Right.
And his first book, called The Mechanical Bride, a classic, highly recommended. He had taken advertisements of the late 40s, and he had analyzed them as if he were a Joycean literary critic, which in fact he was. So he has these very funny analyses of the ads,
Right.
which were in those days much more literary and a lot more Freudian than they are even now.
How do you mean?
Lots more words
Right.
and a lot of weird imagery that you couldn't get away with now.
Right. Did you
Okay,
did
so
you get a
he
chance
did-
to say hello?
Oh, well, so this is what happened. Some of the people whose ads he had taken, such as Procter & Gamble, took exception to this, and he hadn't obtained the copyright. So the book had to be pulled, but we all knew that he had stacks of it in his cellar. So you would go to Marshall McLuhan's house and you'd get a black market copy of The Mechanical Bride out the back window. And I've got one.
That's pretty cool.
Don't you think?
I do think that's very, very cool. What was his house like?
Didn't get into it because this was a back of the house transaction.
Selling books
you
from his
don't go
attic.
into the bootlegger's house. You just get hold of the bottle.
You just get the whiskey.
Yeah.
So your first book of poetry as an adult was a pamphlet called Double Persephone in
Yes,
1961.
just barely an adult.
And you did all the artwork yourself.
No, I hand set it.
Well, that's the thing.
I typeset it.
You typeset it yourself on an old flat flatbed press, right?
belonging to John Robert Colombo.
I don't know who John Robert Colombo
Well,
is.
have a gander. Wikipedia is
Have
your
a
friend.
Google.
Yes,
Right.
have a Wikipedia.
Essentially, if he didn't play banjo in the 40s, I don't really know who he is, Margaret. If his name doesn't begin with Old Joe something,
Okay,
I'm essentially
old
out.
John Robert Colombo.
Yeah. Oh, him. Yes, great author. And, of course, banjo
Okay,
player.
he used to run the poetry nights at the Bohemian Embassy, a coffee house on St. Nicholas Street in 1960-61, where I gave my first poetry readings. But he also was the possessor of this flatbed press. So yes, I hand set it and didn't make very many copies, worse luck.
Well, and they sold them for 50 cents each. You know that original
Yeah.
copies sell for thousands and thousands of
I
dollars
know
now.
it makes me sick. I should have kept, hundreds of them.
You got to get a couple of copies in the basement, maybe. You can hand them out. I'll come by. You can hand them
you
out.
think?
You can hand them out through the basement to me. If you're just tuning in, I'm speaking with Margaret Atwood. We're celebrating her birthday. She's here with me in the studio. You went to Harvard for grad school in '61 when you were 21. That was the year JFK took office. It was the year of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and perhaps more momentously, it was your first time living outside of Canada.
That's true.
What was your biggest surprise of living in the States for the first
My
time?
biggest surprise was that my roommate, who was from North Carolina, couldn't go anywhere without people saying, "What a cute accent, say it again." But I could pass amongst them unnoticed and unobserved. Yeah, so
Like a
I
spy.
was a secret agent
Right.
from another country, whereas she, from within the country, was an oddity. So she used to try to get me to teach her how to speak Canadian. And we would spend some time rehearsing to no avail.
Can you teach me?
How to speak Canadian?
I have a hard time with them.
Not like her.
No, I mean,
So I'd
now.
say oil
Yeah.
and boil.
Oil and boil.
boil. She
Yeah.
would say oil, bowl,
Oil, bowl.
bowl.
Yeah.
Oh, you wanted to speak North Carolinian.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, she had a very thick accent.
But you would teach her oil and boil.
She wanted to speak like me so
Right.
that people wouldn't tell her how cute she was all the time.
But for you, I mean, when you went down there, I mean, I know when I first started to go to the States, I said, oh, these are people, they're just like me. And then when I went down there, and I don't quite have the language to describe it, but I felt, oh, and this is actually a little bit different. I wanted to know if you felt the same when you were going to Harvard.
It was a little bit different,
How so did you find?
quite a lot different.
How'd you find?
The United States, Tom,
I'm
is
familiar
a
with it.
very large, rich country.
Yeah.
The United States, Tom.
Is this the Wikipedia voice?
Yes.
What is the GDP?
Quite frequently doesn't know much about Canada.
Right.
And particularly it did not in 1960. So I'm afraid I took to lying because they would say, oh, so do you live in an igloo? And I got to saying, yes, but it's an igloo with several different rooms in it. It's quite a big igloo. And do you have a dog? Yes, I've got a lovely dog team. I've got 12 wonderful huskies. Because you kind of couldn't disabuse them of this idea that it was cold all the time and that you all lived in igloos. But I know things have changed since then because we've had Leonard Cohen since then, but and other stars of stage and screen who are in fact Canadian.
I've heard that anyway, Leonard.
And it's true.
Leonard Cohen.
Yes, he started to make an impact, but he hadn't yet made one in 1961.
When did you first meet him?
In the 60s when I was teaching in Montreal. So that would be 67.
And was he Leonard Cohen by then, or was he?
He was pretty much Leonard Cohen by then.
Oh, my.
He started out as a poet. So he was well known as a poet in the early 60s, but he had not yet become the big music star that he was shortly to become.
Were you a fan?
Oh, everybody loved Leonard Cohen.
Who could not? You yourself won the Governor General's Award in '66 for your collection of poems, The Circle Game. This was your first book after Double Persephone, the one you printed yourself. What do you remember about getting that kind of recognition in your 20s?
Okay, first of all, who knew what it was? Second, I was living in a...
You didn't know what the Governor General's Award was?
Not really.
Me neither. I don't know.
Not much.
I'm with you, okay.
So I knew that it was about the only literary award there was at that time, so I knew it was a big deal. But I was 27. So my main problem at that moment was, what do you wear to it? Because I didn't have any of those kinds of clothes. So I acquired there's a place in Boston called Filene's Basement, where you could go.
I've heard of Filene's Basement, yeah.
So I think actually I borrowed a dress from one of my roommates. I don't think I even went to Filene's basement for that. And what had I bought with the, to me, enormous I had bought my first contact lenses, but they were the hard kind. So if you got a speck in your eye, it was very painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just started learning to wear them. I was only supposed to be wearing them a half an hour at a time.
Right.
So I get stuck in the ceremony. It goes on and on. I don't know how to take them out without a mirror. So then I end up at this dinner, and by this time I'm weeping. And the nice gentlemen on either side of me thought that I was overcome by emotion, so they start drying my tears and patting me and telling me it will be all right. So the first chance I get, I rush into the ladies and pry them out of my eyes. By this time, they're very painful.
So how did you react when you won, outside of the desperate pain?
What am I supposed to say? Godsend,
Yeah.
chunk of cash. I bought an electric typewriter, plus the contact lenses. It was a big deal.
Were your folks proud of you at that moment?
I don't know whether they really registered because they didn't. They were not part of the extremely small, minute, minuscule literary scene in Canada.
Yeah.
So I think they thought it was very nice. But they would have said that. I mean, no matter what I was put on, my mother would say, "You look very nice," and I think, "You're just saying that because you're my mother."
I know, but
tell me the truth.
But isn't that nice? Isn't that
Yes,
great?
it is lovely.
I love that too.
Yeah. So I did have my first interview for a newspaper, and it was a guy who was on his way back from the Vietnam War, a war reporter, and he was passing through Boston, so they said, "Why don't you just go and interview this Canadian poet who's won this thing?" So there he is, this battle-hardened journo. Here I am, 27 years old, with my little horn-rimmed glasses.
Yeah.
And he looks at me, and I look at him, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and he says, "Say something interesting. Say you write all your poetry on drugs." Because, of course, by now it was the LSD moment.
Sure. And did you?
No.
Not did you write all your poetry on drugs? I mean, that's another question I possibly could ask. Or you didn't
Did
say
I
that
say
to appease him?
I did not say that to appease him.
It's an interesting way to conduct your first interview, Margaret.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I could have lied.
You could have also just taken some LSD, and the interview might have been really fun then. Not for me.
I don't think so.
Not for me. I want to skip ahead a little bit because you've been generous, but I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Yes, you do. Don't lie.
I don't.
You do.
I don't.
You do.
I don't. If I did, I'd shut down the curtain and take my headphones off and lock the door, and I'd get out the absinthe and the LSD, and we'd have quite a birthday party.
Why am I not believing you, Tom?
You probably should, you should. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I got about 15 minutes left.
Well, let's settle on that. You don't want to take up too much of my time.
Christ, you're a busy person. I want to talk about another Governor General's Award. So The Handmaid's Tale wins the Governor General's Award, this time a little bit bigger. I've wondered about this. By this time your daughter was in high school. Handmaid's Tale is quite often required reading in school. Was it required reading for her when she was in school?
I don't know the answer to that, but you could ask her.
You don't know? She never came home with a book report saying, "Hey, Mom, I got to do your book," or anything like that?
Nope.
Wow. So I'm guessing not. I'm guessing had she had to do it, she probably would.
She just might have been quite secretive.
Was it... how did it feel for you to have a book become required reading? Like, I feel like that's another echelon for an author.
Okay, so
I love that you looked at me when I said echelon, by the way.
Yeah, I like...
I'm glad you were looking over there and I said echelon. You came back in.
Yeah, what? What does that mean? So the real result of it is that if it's required reading in high school, those who read it think you're actually dead. But you know that people that you read in high school are dead, right? You always knew that. So
you assume that they're dead.
Yeah, as a high school student, you assume they're dead.
Right.
So you can be quite a surprise when you turn up in real life and you're not dead.
Yeah.
And they will say, "But I took you in high school."
But it must be meaningful also as well to have a book to be deemed important enough that it should be taught to the
Of course, you don't know
masses.
how it's being taught, do you?
No,
because you're not there in the room.
Does that ever concern you?
No, because I have no control over it. But I can tell you a result. The showrunner of The Handmaid's Tale, his name is Bruce Miller, got this book assigned in high school, where he read it. And at that time, when he was an adolescent, he thought to himself, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to make this into a TV show. And he did.
That seems like a pretty good way of teaching it if that's how he got it.
Well, I think a lot of the things that get made, of various kinds, musical things too, are things that people have been very impressed by as adolescents. And then time passes, and then they have the actual knowledge and power to make them. The same thing happened to Sarah Polley, who read Alias Grace when she was an adolescent and wrote me a letter when she was 17 saying, could I have the rights to this book because I want to make it into a movie. She was 17. She said it only took me 20 years. But I think that's what then happens. You get very impressed by something when you're that age, and then you either emulate it or you recreate it in some way when you've got the skill set to do it.
I think that's what I meant by saying it was meaningful to have it taught then, Margaret, because...
Yeah, I think it was meaningful for other people because it then resulted in, girl people thought that they could write speculative fiction. They thought that these were subjects that could be treated this way. There are now quite a slew of books that circle around these themes. Written by people who acquired the skill set to be able to do it.
Mm. So now we move on to the Testaments, which we kind of started by talking about. The sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, you won the Booker Prize this year jointly with Bernardine Evaristo, who also won for her novel Girl, Woman, Other. The two of you walked up arm in arm to share the award. How did it feel to win that prize?
Well, that was very sweet. So as you know, I won it in the year 2000 for The Blind Assassin. Mm-hmm. As you also know, I didn't win it for The Handmaid's Tale because Kingsley Amis won it for a book called The Old Devils. But even being shortlisted back in 1986 put The Handmaid's Tale on the map. I am no stranger to being shortlisted for the Booker. It has happened to me 6 times. So I have a practiced ability to not win it. So this time, however, it was so that we did win it, and that was very lovely. And what else can I say about that?
I mean, you said you were surprised that you won it. I don't think you were expecting to take it home.
I thought I was out of the age group.
You thought you were maybe too old for it.
Oh, yes, dear, very much too old.
Is that the old person voice?
Yes.
But it's a really tremendous book. What made you want to revisit Aunt Lydia? I mean, this was a character that it was in The Handmaid's Tale, but the true story of Aunt Lydia, how she became who she was.
She's only seen from the outside in The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. And then in the Testaments, it's more about the humanity of Aunt Lydia.
Well, the 3-dimensionality of Aunt Lydia.
Sure.
So she does not come out as an angel, because in fact, she isn't one.
No.
But she is an interesting character all the same.
So when did you make the decision to?
About the middle of 2016.
That's a pretty easy year. Nothing really big happened that year.
Yeah. Before the election, I was doing it, but you could kind of see things moving more towards Gilead than they had been in, say, 1995.
Right.
So for a while, we thought we were moving away from it, but then for some years, we appeared to have been moving back towards it. In many parts of the world, but not in other parts. I was just in Ireland, and they're still pretty perked up by the fact that they reversed this absolutely no birth control or choice at all. They reversed that decision, and they've been digging up a lot of their own past, such as the mother and baby homes in which a lot of babies died because they were malnourished and improperly cared for. So all of that has come to light. There's a book out now called The Republic of Shame,
Well,
which has got it all laid out.
well, I'm glad you have the occasion to look at the lightness in the world. I mean, how do you feel when you see the signs of, make Margaret Atwood fiction again, and these signs you would see?
Well, I think, there's a reason that people are carrying those signs around. It's
Right.
because things seem to have moved back towards Gilead totalitarianism. But just yesterday, we had, I probably shouldn't say just yesterday because you're not broadcasting this for a while.
It's very, very kind of you, and very, very. Thank you for being so perceptive as to help our editing a little bit. I appreciate
helping
that.
your editing.
Thank you.
So in the election of early November 2019, Virginia just went all Democrat, which means they may finally be able to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States.
So you're hopeful. You're feeling that things are.
There's no point
up.
in not being hopeful. I don't necessarily think that they're looking up, but I don't think they're inevitably looking down.
Can I tell you another expression? I know when on the way in I told you an expression. You said that has to be from Newfoundland. Can I tell you another one?
Yes.
We must live in hopes, supposing we die in despair.
Well, that is very cheery.
Margaret, I'm not entirely sure how to bring this up, but I certainly I wanted to pass on my condolences on the loss of your partner, Graham.
Yes, it was very sad, but not unexpected.
I just want to talk a little bit about him. Graham Gibson was a novelist, a nonfiction writer, a conservationist, a human rights activist. With you, he was a founding member of both the Writers' Union of Canada and the Writers' Trust of Canada. He served as the president of PEN Canada. But I'd love if you could just tell me something about him.
Graham.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of thing? Would you like a funny thing?
Whatever you'd like.
Whatever I'd like. He was a great cook.
Is that so? What did he like to cook?
He liked to cook whatever he felt like cooking at the moment.
Right.
So he...
what was his specialty? What was your favorite thing he cooked?
He had quite a range of things, but he had some things that he invented himself.
Yeah. Like what?
He had a very good garlic soup recipe that he put things into it from different garlic soups he had here and there, and he perfected it. So I have that recipe. I'll sell it to you.
I'll take it out of the back of the attic later with the Marshall Mcluhan books. What? Give me a memory of them, if you don't mind.
Graham, early Graham, middle Graham, or later Graham?
Middle Graham.
Middle Graham. That would be probably, let's say, our first canoe trip. The first canoe trip was on Lake Temagami, and we were in a pretty unfrequented part of it, and we had used up all our bacon. And we found this great big stash of puffballs, but we didn't have anything to cook them in. So we paddled around until we found a lone cabin, and it had a flag flying, so there were people home, so covered with soot, and with our hunting knives in full view. We went up to the door and knocked, and we said, "Would you happen to have a couple of pieces of bacon?" I think we completely terrorized elderly people that were there. "Oh, yeah, just a minute. Take the whole pound." Slam, lock.
It doesn't help that you were wearing ski masks when you went in.
We were not wearing ski masks. We just looked as if we were.
But you're doing all right. I just wanted to see how you're doing.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm all right talking to you.
Yeah.
So I think it's better to be with people.
Yeah.
However, I have lots of friends and family and cousins.
We were all thinking about you, so
Thank you.
I wanted to let you know. When we passed on the word on the show here, we got a lot of notes, and I wanted to pass on that a lot of people were thinking about you, and we certainly were as well.
Well, he had a wide circle of friends and acquaintances, so I've heard from a lot of people.
I'm glad.
Different walks of life, the international birding community, the writing communities here and there, and all sorts of people that he knew.
Well, as I want to be so cognizant of your time, I don't want to take up too much of your time, as we've established, Margaret. I thought I'd close off like this. In a CBC interview in I love talking to you, by the way. I get a kick out of it, man.
Enjoyed the moment.
I am certainly enjoying it. In a CBC interview in 1977, you said, "I laugh at my public image. Otherwise, I jump off a bridge."
Yeah, well, you can't control your public image, can you? So I have known writers, not mentioning any names, who started believing in the inflated billboard picture of themselves that might be out there. And that is fatal.
What do people get wrong about you in your public image?
I'm not sure that I have just one public image.
But when you see people write about you.
Well, that's been very variable over the years. So they're not reviewing my hair anymore, which they used to do quite a bit. The Medusa curls. Oh, so
there's
I used to get that.
an evilness, a darkness.
You know, let me tell you another story.
Sure.
My neighbor, Sam, he was a lawyer of an eccentric disposition, came out one October when I was sweeping up my leaves with a broom, and he said, "Margaret, you shouldn't let people see you doing that." I said, "Sam, what are you talking about?" "It's the broom, Margaret." I said, "Sam, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, don't you know people call you the Wicked Witch of the Annex?" And I said, "Sam, fear is given more respect than love." He said, "Margaret, you're right."
I'm going to leave it there. It's been nice talking to you.
Yeah.
Thanks for making the time.
Scared?
Loved.
Oh, cute.
Oh, come on.